agenda that we'll be covering today for Middleware Concepts are definition, history, why we need middleware, and the challenges that we face with middleware. The definition of middleware. Middleware is the bringing together of different systems so they work together. For example, if we have application A and application B, how do they communicate within this environment? That's what we do in middleware. That's the middleware environment. This is how we interact with that environment from the back end. This is us as little people. And this is our data back here. So as a definition of middleware, it's the bringing together, or it's the plumbing, it's the internal processing of data elements working with data that resides in the back end. So these are the data elements, or the plumbing, the internal mechanisms that we work with inside the environment. So definition, again, we can say it's the bringing together of different or uncommon components into a framework that's common to interact with front end and back end. So that is the definition of middleware. How did middleware start? Middleware started as a solution to a problem. We had this. We knew we had people. We had people and we needed to get to the data. We have the data, but how do we get to that data? And we had sophisticated applications that we wanted to develop in order to bring these two parties together. Hence, we developed middleware. So middleware evolved about 1970, 75. And from that period, it has really evolved into a sophisticated platform of interrelated components. And what we're going to start really talking about is how application B or application A, application B work together with the data and that human component. So from a historical perspective, we really started to think about bringing all this stuff together. So the definition, what it is, in terms of the plumbing, the inner workings, and the history of it, allowed us to really kind of bring together everything into one framework. Now, we have many different vendors of middleware, ranging from Oracle, SAP, we have IBM WebSphere. So we have a number of different players within this environment that they do different things. Okay. However, the overall framework or the underpinnings of the technology is all about the same. So when we get into architecture and deployment, it does vary slightly. However, what we have to look at is what we're trying to achieve in the long run. So history brought us to this point in driving us to getting to the data, getting to what we really need, and ultimately that is data. So again, why do we need middleware? Middleware drives data. It drives that human element of getting to the data. The need for it really was because, like I mentioned earlier, getting to this application B and application A. But if we have multiple parties trying to get to the same information, how do we do that? So if we have different groups of users, one being a general, just say general user, and then we have a admin user, how does this work in terms of getting to this? Okay. So we have to build out our components or our applications that allow us to get to this information. So this and this coming through the same gateway or mechanism here will allow us to get to this here. So really, the idea of why we need it is bringing these users to this data via these components with a sense of a different processing purpose. The purpose of it is different. So that's why we do need middleware. Now, I want to jump ahead to challenges because these kind of interrelate. These two things here interrelate, the challenges and why we need it. The challenges of middleware are many, I should say, many, because of the applications and the sophistications of applications today. One of the challenges is deployment. Deployment. And that's a big one, so I want to put a big check mark by that. Deployment. How do we deploy applications in a middleware environment? Well, like I said, we have application A and application B. Do they deploy the same? Probably not. Each deployment is going to be different depending on the vendor who has developed it and the ultimate implementation plan that is provided by the vendor. And also, the deployment mechanisms we are challenged by these two groups of users. So the user A and user B are going to look at deployment from a different perspective. Okay, so that's one challenge we face. Two is, if I can write this right, development. The development of applications as a result of middleware has changed. We no longer develop to the database directly. Now we develop to the middle tier or the middleware here so we can drive how this information gets pulled back to the user. So the user is requesting something, how is it going to come back to the user based on this functionality here? So development and the aspects of such things as J2EE, that drives, or the Java-based components, which drives this technology in the middleware sector, is a real challenge. Because each one of these may be done slightly different. Okay, so application A and its architecture, I'm going to abbreviate that, architecture, is going to be different than application A's architecture. Okay, hopefully, it does meet J2EE standards. However, they may be slightly different. But we always want to look at the overall underpinnings of the middleware environment, which should hold that if it is J2EE compliant, it's going to fit in. However, and this is always a big if this deploys slightly different than this, how are they going to interact together? Okay, so that's always a major challenge that we face. But this kind of works with this, right? We can't have development without ultimately having deployment. So what comes first, deployment or development? We always want to say, well, we're going to develop the application first, and then we're going to deploy it. However, the real challenge is from anybody who's working in this environment is say, wonderful, we have got a great application. How do we get it in? How do we get it in? By making sure that we have the architectural components needed to fulfill the requirement of user A and user B. Okay? So the deployment mechanisms for A and B are going to be different. We have to make sure that the architecture holds true. And then we have some mechanism for data, I'm just going to say conversion. Conversion is just getting that data in and working with the data. Because the middleware is great. We can have it up and running, wonderful. But now what do we do with the data? We've got to get it in somehow. Making sure that it's new data or old data, it's still got to work. Again, deployment and development, making sure it's in there and it's in the right spots. The next challenge we have, along with the deployment and development, overall challenges would be components. Hopefully everybody can read that. Components. And the components of middleware are just not application A, application B, but they can be such things as wireless, they can be portals, they can be decision support systems, they can be other applications. They could be other server modules. They could be reporting modules. So there's a whole list of middleware components that can be brought into this picture for deployment. But yet there is that overall development aspect to it. Now, even once the development does happen, or deployment does happen, development still has to come in and bring these things together. The challenges that we face in the middleware environment are, one, from a highest level, and drilling into it would be deployment and architecture. Okay, so deployment, making sure that we can, get it in. Okay, how are we going to get it in? And then from a development perspective, does it meet the overall architectural requirements? Is it J2EE compliant? Meaning, is it Java based? If not, are we going to be able to fulfill at least the framework for a Java platform? Because ultimately, that's what it's going to be. Okay, so that is why we say why we need it. We need it to make sure we could get it in. We can work with it. The challenges that we face from getting it in are: is it going to work together? So in conclusion, we've covered the definition. It's just the plumbing. It brings everything together. History of it started in the early 70s, evolved from there into a very sophisticated, interrelated platform of components and vendors. Why do we need it? We need it to bring these applications together. We need to bring users together with data, and that's done through this middleware or middle tier environment. Challenges. The challenges are getting user A, user B to their data. It's done through applications. It's done through server level modules. It's done through reporting. It's done through wireless. It's done through portals. So all that together is why we do need it. Obviously, we face challenges along the road. We face challenges with deployment, face challenges with development. But ultimately, hopefully, we get it in, we get it working, we get it validated, and we have user A and user B get into their data.